Say, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. So I wanted to talk about the Southern strategy, and one of the things I've seen you talk about a lot is how it was effective in basically turning the GOP into what it is today.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I've sort of noticed is it was also effective in desensitizing white Americans who live in rather homogenous areas to issues regarding race and sort of the plight of African Americans. Like, I know you mentioned that experiment with the white mice and the black mice.
Right.
And one thing I've noticed just living here in Kansas is, especially in the area I live in, I went to a predominantly white high school. And so up until my junior and senior years of high school, I was unaware of the issues regarding race with police brutality, and then also some racial issues here in my own state. I don't know if you're familiar with J.C. Nichols.
Boy, that name sounds familiar, but refresh my memory.
He created the truce dividing line in, I think it's Kansas City, Missouri, where it was to keep the white people in higher and upper mid-income housing, and to keep African Americans and people of color in low-income housing. And just a couple years ago, a friend of mine's dad wrote in the Kansas City Star that we need to rename the J.C. Nichols Fountain because of the racial histories behind it.
Wow.
And it was basically he was comparing it to how southern states were taking down Confederate memorials. And so I thought it was interesting because, I wasn't unaware of these issues until recently. And now that I'm aware, I see that there is a lot more racism that the United States needs to overcome than I did previously. I think part of that is an effect of the Southern strategy, where people like me don't realize this until recently, and now when they realize it, they start to become more aware and want to change something about that.
Let me see, Scott, if I can feed back to you what I think I'm hearing you say, and that is that when Nixon rolled out the Southern strategy in '68 to reach out to white racists in the South who had been voting Democratic for years and years and years, now that the Democratic Party had abandoned them with the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65, that when Nixon did that, the principal way that he reached out to those white racists in the South was by talking about crime and welfare. And he very rarely used words that were racially charged or, that explicitly mentioned race, but race was the clear and obvious subtext to pretty much everything he was saying, and pretty much everything every Republican politician from that day to this has been saying. And as a consequence of that, a lot of white people who live in a white bubble heard that language and internalized that message without even realizing that it could have been written by the Klan. Is that a reasonable recharacterization of what you just said?
Yeah, I think it's fair.
Yeah, because I think that's absolutely true. I know that I was contaminated by that back in the day. I think that probably the vast majority, if not all, white people in the United States were in one way or another. In thinking about issues about welfare and schools and all these other things. Yeah, I get it, Steve. I absolutely get it. That's a good one. Steve, thank you for the observation. It's brilliant. Matt.